Charles Gracie and his co-host Paul Gibson. Joined by Josh Haynes, they'll be tackling tough industry topics, asking even tougher questions, all to find better solutions as they try to make sense make sense.
Thank you for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson.
Hey, I'm Josh Haynes. You want to know what truck drivers' favorite parts about going to the movies are? The trailers. Gentlemen, what are we talking about on today's episode?
We're talking about the lead that you need.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to, get leads and information from drivers who are applying for jobs. You can go for matched leads. You can go for direct leads. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but essentially, we're going to break down why one might be better than the other, why they both might be the same, and we'll find out.
Yeah, but before we do that, let's give a shout out to our sponsors.
Who's our sponsors today, Charles?
Our sponsor, CDLLife. They got one of the world's largest driver audiences. You guys should check them out. They got great content.
As well as Hot Seat Services. Hiring drivers is their jam. Charles, I'm talking about you. All right, Paul, let's move along in this episode.
So we're skipping 10-2 news this week to kind of have a little bit of a different segment. We needed something, so I did a thing, and Charles, I'm not Charles's favorite person right now. I signed Charles up for a couple of job boards just to kind of see what would happen so we could take a look at what match leads actually look like. So about 4:30 this morning, I just put his information in just to see what would happen. So, Charles, could you report on how your phone's doing?
You're off my Christmas card mailing list.
Bah humbug.
Man, this was nuts. I don't even know what part of this to dissect first because I took down the notes. It was too much to remember, but I had 36 phone calls since you did that this morning. I had 56 text messages and an ungodly amount of emails to the point where I almost want to shut down my email. But that's just the number side of it. I think the parts that irritated me the most was I actually played ball because I had to answer these calls. For those that don't know, I run a recruiting company. So when a company calls, I have to answer. And it's like a 50-50 right now. Are they calling for a business and they need drivers, or do they think I'm a driver because Paul decided to just absolutely wreck my life today? At 6:30 this morning, though, I got a phone call. All right. So I'm like, at this point, I didn't even know what was happening. A phone call. It was right before it. There was a text saying, Olivia is going to call you. Press 1. So I played ball. I pressed 1, except it rang for almost 10 minutes and nobody answered. It said in a message, there is a recruiter on the other side of the line waiting to talk to you. I'm like, okay, let's talk. Nope. Just sat there. I think that missed its mark. In this little, experiment of yours, I saw things that were executed really well, like companies that were on it. They did it the right way. Text and email information. This is the number that's going to be calling. This is our offer to review in case you had questions. And then I saw some that were just like missing the mark completely, which you should definitely give us a call. We can help you. But honestly, man, it melted my mind. I was surprised at how many calls I got before normal operating hours.
I was kind of wondering about that when I did it because I was up with the kids. They woke up super early. It's one of their birthdays, So that being said, I was curious about that. With it being before hours, how many calls you would actually start getting at that point in time. So that's interesting that there are recruiters who are up and ready to take calls at that point in time.
There are not, I can assure you, there are no recruiters that are up. It's a bunch of auto dialing machines calling you, telling you that a recruiter is eager to talk to you and will call you back later. Or text messages that chain link together saying, hey, fill out this app. I'm not in the office right now. And then all of a sudden 8:00 comes in. I'm in the office. You're in the queue for me to call. It was just this domino effect of disappointment.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of interesting, though, that some of those people were set up to at least give you those kinds of status updates, though. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's, I don't know which one you signed me up for. All I know is I never want you to do that again. And this is probably payback for locking you in the closet with hours of service. But honestly, I think it was enlightening to see what the drivers are going through, because this wasn't a thing back when I drove. Like it existed, but not to this extent. I think more people are leveraging ways to automate recruiting, and this is one of those things where it could be great and it could be a tool, or it could be abused and be something that's detrimental to your recruiting efforts. Because I would not call that carrier that called me at 6:30 in the morning and said, "Hey, we got a recruiter waiting for you." And then I sat in queue for 10 minutes before I hung up. Who knows? I might have been in queue until 8 a.m. when they came in.
That's true. You could have been on there for a long time. Sorry to do that to you. Not sorry, because I'm pretty sure it made for some good TV. But now it's time for our next segment, which is Behind the Wheel. All right, so now it's time for Behind the Wheel. So partnering with CDLLife, we have access to their audience just like every week. And we poll drivers and ask drivers questions with the largest audience of truck drivers in the world to find out real opinions about real issues from real drivers. And this week we decided to ask, do you look at multiple carriers when you change jobs? And 86% of drivers said yes, which means only 14 said no. So, well, 14%.
Yeah, and you think about this, like when you're looking for a job, or I know at least from my experience when I'm looking, I'm not just like, this is the only place I'm applying. I'm looking at options. That's what the whole point of shopping around is. So why would drivers be any different? And I think this actually leads into the argument of match leads versus direct, because everyone's a match lead at this point, whether it's through a single point of contact that they filled it out, or the fact that they applied at several places while shopping around, and not to mention all the times before that they applied at places. The lead didn't disappear out of the system.
So what I mean, and that's kind of curious to the the situation that you're in right now.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't drive anymore. So if you guys got something from Paul and it comes back to my number, just put it as not interested. Unless you got a really attractive offer, then we're open to a conversation.
Since per mile goes over the road. No, but seriously, that being said, it is interesting too that previously we talked about how easy it is to apply at places and stuff like that for drivers. Now it's one of those things, if you do want to look at multiple carriers, you can get a really good look at a whole lot of carriers really easy without really having to do that much lift. You literally just put in your information. I've tried it and
put in your own, not somebody else's.
Fair enough. But it is interesting that like that many drivers do look at multiple carriers when they're applying, especially, because we've talked about it before as well, that, you might have that driver who comes into orientation and has talked to multiple companies and doesn't remember which offer was your offer, or gets the offers confused.
Well, that happens all the time in recruiting, man. Listen, even when I was a driver, so my dad gave me the advice to always pick pick three and go with those. And I never followed his advice. And you would talk to so many recruiters, and by the time you made a choice, the offers kind of merged. It's not a misstep from the recruiters. They said what the offer was. I'm not saying that there's not bad ones out there either. But by the time I got to the orientation, I may have merged some of the pieces from the others because it was just too much to soak in. And that's where you sort that stuff out. And I think that's where recruiting can put an offer letter together and put it in front of the driver at an earlier stage, things like that can combat that. But as a recruiter, we see it all the time. They merge the best parts and they form their own dream job. And when they walk in the orientation, like, you didn't tell me that, you told me this. And it's like clear as day that it was in the communication. So I think that's one of those things where we as an industry can just do better of communicating and understanding that takes place.
I'm going to have to cut you guys off because it is time to move on to our next segment, and that is This Week in Recruiting.
All right, it's time for This Week in Recruiting, where we ask Charles how it was this week in recruiting.
This week in recruiting is like every other week, but what we start to see a little bit more of at this time of the year is significant others getting involved in the process. And this takes place throughout the year as well, but I can't tell you how many times my recruiters or myself have had more conversations in the last week with a wife or a spouse or a loved one or a mother than we did the driver during the interview process, because they want to make sure all the ducks are going to be in a row for the holidays.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. No, I remember when I was recruiting, the first time that happened, I was like, hold on. And I looked over at my boss. I was like, am I allowed to talk to somebody besides the driver about the driver's job? And he was like, yeah, man. And I was like, okay. So, but I've always found it really interesting in that scenario. Talking to the wife, I actually almost, or husband or whoever, I actually I almost prefer those calls, because, sure, a driver might think about, the negatives and the positives that they're looking for and what the deal killers are. But I've actually found in those conversations, there's a lot of times you'll find additional deal killers or additional issues with the people that are running the house at home, because they're very much a part of, like, they're affected by this job a lot. We talk a lot about how drivers are out and about, but like the people at home are affected by their absence almost as much as they're affected by being absent.
And it's a two-way street. Those people weigh into that decision a lot. And from a recruiting perspective, having that conversation on the front end, if a driver wants one of our recruiters to talk to their wife or their mother or their brother or whoever, we're okay with that, because we realize that we're getting past a hurdle that would have later presented itself. And I'd rather address those questions right now on the forefront than wait till they manifest later after an airline ticket's been purchased or something. So it does throw you off the first time, like you said, that it happens, but you start to see it more and more right now. And then you also see that sometimes recruiting will leverage that. Like drivers put emergency contacts on their applications. And if a driver starts ghosting, some recruiting teams are taught to call that emergency contact. Maybe the driver lives in the basement of his mother and mom wants him to be working. She loves to find out that he's not accepting our job. All of a sudden he shows up to orientation. So, I mean, there's different tricks and tips for that. And people feel differently about it. But at the end of the day, yes, their family matters. Those significant others matter, and incorporating them only strengthens your relationship with that applicant to bring them into your team.
And I mean, I personally don't love that calling the emergency contact. That was just my opinion whenever that did come up. But at the same time, though, I think that also does a good job, because, me, I hate it when trucking companies are like, we'll treat you like family. Even if you do, like, there's, a lot of trucking companies out there say that, and they just mean you're going to spend the holidays with us and we're going to owe you money. At least that's my family experience. But anyway, so the thing is, though, is by including their family in those calls sometimes lets that driver know that you understand they have a family at home. You understand that they are trying to make a living. They're trying to support these people that you're on the phone with outside of them. And I think companies being willing to do that, I think that's a huge gesture. All right, Brian, you're good to go. I'll see you next week. Okay, bye. And that's another one on the schedule.
Hello, orientation!
CDLLife can make any recruiter a rock star. Get started today.
All right, and it's time to make sense, which is our main topic that we're getting into. And today we're talking about matched versus direct leads, or quantity versus quality. One time I heard an analogy that's a little off, but pretty on point at the same time, is that, matched leads are kind of like speed dating your drivers, or being on a dating app and constantly swiping left and right. From both sides, because that driver is just going like, oh, I like this one, I don't like this one, and you're seeing a bunch. And honestly, direct leads are more kind of like just sliding into the DMs. Either that driver saw you and was like, I want to know about them, or you put yourself out there and that you want to get a hold of that particular driver. So it's not that either one is necessarily better or worse. I don't think. I think it's just a matter of how you want to move forward. What do you think about that, Charles?
Well, there are differences, and it's understanding differences in the cost, differences in the execution of processing those leads to be effective as a recruiting department, differences in understanding where those leads came from. At the end of the day, in today's world, we're no longer dealing with paper apps in most cases. And if you are, you definitely need to fix that. But when we're putting ourselves in the driver's shoes, they're shopping around, whether they clicked a job board and their one apply went to 10 different places, or in my case, as of today, we're up to 36, or whether they actually went out and beat the internet 36 different times at 36 different places, they're still looking. The chances of them saying, I only applied at you, not happening nowadays. It's just not the reality. So as addressing being a recruiting department for a match lead, yes, I prioritize those. I want to get in front of those because I know that there's competition out there getting in front of those. If it's a direct apply, that's great that they're interested in me. I want to pursue that, but I want to get in front of those match leads, and it helps me get volume. I'm building an entire database of people that may be interested in what I have. So I want that. I want to nurture that. I want to communicate what we have and get in front of as many people as possible, at least in my way that I like to recruit and brand.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I had a little bit of a different experience when I was recruiting and doing marketing. We definitely went more for direct leads. But it also, it costs a lot more per lead. It took a lot more. It took a lot more branding. It took a lot more putting ourselves out there. But we would get a lot more warm calls. And I don't feel bad saying it because that's just the recruiting market and has been for years. Most of our drivers currently had jobs. They didn't even hate their jobs. They were just that interested in us that they wanted to call because of the way that we put ourselves out there. But once again, we weren't necessarily as much going for volume. We did still do matched leads, but we weren't as much going for volume as much as we were trying to get those warm leads directly. And that worked out great for us.
We like the volume because we have so many different offers that we can give to a driver depending on what their wants and needs are. So I think you have to look internally at your structure and what you actually want. You have to be honest with yourself, look in the mirror and say, do I need volume for my recruiting team to be successful? Or do I need quality? Do they need to be someone that directly applied at my ad? And there's a value to both. And then there's the opportunity to mix, to have the best of both worlds. I think some of the most successful recruiting initiatives that I've seen put into place on as far as marketing to drivers go, it's having that diversification. And very rarely do I hear anyone argue with that, because having that diversification allows you to have a little bit of your cake and save it for later too. So
one thing I would kind of want to point out though is when we do say quantity versus quality, it's not that you're going to necessarily get more quality drivers through direct leads versus match leads. It's just you're going to have a higher intent. That's what's implied by quality, because you can definitely get some direct leads that are terrible, and you can get some match leads that are amazing.
Yeah, and when we're talking about that, you're right. You're spot on. The quality as far as a lead goes, is it a viable applicant? Are they in your hiring area? Those things are there. Those things exist. The difference is at one point, this person was matched up with your parameters that you've given whatever company you work with. And the other one, they saw your ad, they directly clicked on your ad. The approach is different. The quality of the lead itself and the cost are the only things that play into that. Match leads are going to be a little bit cheaper, which is why you're getting volume. Direct higher intent leads, you're going to pay for that because your ad physically has to be put in front of that applicant. So, I mean, these are things where as a recruiting department, playing with them, toying with them, working with a reputable vendor that's going to educate you on how they apply those and how they measure those for your success, that's going to be your benefit.
I'm curious about the intent on match leads versus direct leads, and I don't know that we quite see eye to eye, but our person that we have in the passenger seat today is pretty much an expert on the topic and has blown my mind several times on these conversations. We have Bobby Thompson again.
How are we doing, Bobby? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Good to be back, guys.
So we're talking about matched versus direct, the lead that a carrier may need, and the different executions to this. We've all had some great conversations with you on this. So could you drop a little knowledge to our viewers over here on which one's best?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. So the debate about intent. So it depends on kind of more than just. I mean, there's more information. There's different types of match leads, different types of direct leads, right? I would say at CDLLife, on balance, we see that the lead to hire ratio for direct is lower than matched. So that might make you think that match leads are lower intent, right? But it really depends. So a match lead, at CDLLife, we match leads to no more than 10 companies, but on average, it's like less than 3, right? A lead that matched to 10, very different than a lead that matched to 2. If you go somewhere else, like wherever Paul put Charles's lead, if you match to 36, that's a little different than 2 as well, right? I think that in some ways, I think that what some people miss is what's more important than just the intent is the plan and the behavior that the team takes after the apply, depending on what you know about the behavior of the driver. Even on the direct lead side, there might be 100 different ways that we collect direct leads, and they aren't all the same thing, right? Sometimes somebody's seeking you out as a company and knows everything about you. Other times, somebody saw an advertisement, they weren't looking for a job, they just saw an advertisement out of the blue and something caught their eye, right? Very different behavior, and trying to figure out how to talk to a driver based on the behavior is very different. So match lead, what we tend to see is, we talk about intent. Think of intent as the interest in a job. There's kind of 3 components: interest in a job, interest in your job, and competition. Match lead tends to have high competition, but it also tends to have really high interest in a job. They're filling their name out on a place saying, match me somewhere. I want a job, right? So if you call them and you say, hey, thanks for applying to my company, they might go, I didn't apply to your company. Who are you, right? They did a match program. But if you say, I see you're looking for a job, let me explain to you the benefits of working for us. You put the conversation, you match where they're at with what your strategies are. So it's all kind of about alignment between the strategy of the recruiting and the lead generation and where the driver's at. And they got to kind of all marry up.
So what I'm hearing here is that having that communication, have that understanding of where the lead's coming from and what methods are used to bring them in front of the recruiting department, but also having that conversation with your recruiting department at how to approach that lead could dictate the success with a match lead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, recruiting is in a lot of ways maybe similar to sales, right? And you would have a different conversation with different people depending on what you know about them and how they ended up there, right? And what we've often seen is that people who have the right strategies with match leads can have a way lower cost per hire, even if it is a higher lead to hire, right? They know the strategy of, okay, there's a competition. So the number one thing I need to say on the phone is why to work for us, right? It's also be respectful with them. Don't call them at 6:30 a.m. and let them sit for 15 minutes, because now you just hurt yourself in the competition race. They're mad at you.
I can attest to this. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to be calling that carrier and offering my services afterwards. But so thank you for that, Paul. Honestly, being on the driver's side, being on the carrier side, and now on the vendor side, having that perspective, I've seen it where I do prefer to work match leads because I see that they have it's a numbers game in a lot of times, and having those numbers can be beneficial if you know what to do with them and if you know how to nurture that pipeline. But at the same point, I do see a value in those directs. Sometimes those will convert a little bit faster on the front end because that person might not be evaluating so many different offers. Or Bobby, we've talked about this. Drivers aren't just applying at one place. So even if you're getting a direct lead, it's almost a match lead in a lot of regards because they probably clicked on about 7 other ads after yours.
Yeah, so that's kind of why I mentioned that there's a lot of different types of direct leads. You can go find different job boards out there where there's very little information about the jobs, and drivers are kind of going down, clicking, and applying. You might be the 10th one. If you're the 10th one, is that really better or less competition or different than a match lead? I don't think so. I think one of the most valuable things you could do is potentially work with your lead generation provider to get more information about what the strategy should be for the people. What do you know about them? What are the behaviors? It's kind of something that we work on is studying everything about the driver's behavior and past applications, the website, app, jobs they've clicked to figure out what is the likelihood we think of this driver to end up working for that carrier. And we want to put the right things in front of the right people and make sure all of our carriers get the right balance of different types of leads there. So it's not just tailoring your strategies for match leads. It's also the direct leads. What do how fast and how quickly can you figure out where this driver is in that conversation? And then tailor your messaging to that.
So, and what I think is unique about where you guys sit over there at CDLLife is you guys have a plethora of drivers. You have a plethora of data and clients that you work with various needs. And one of the things that I've come to learn is that you guys are completely customizable based on those conversations. What you do for each client is not a cookie cutter mold. The better that relationship gets with that client, the better the results generally get coming from you guys. So if you could give anyone advice from your side of the fence on things that they could do better to optimize working those match leads, optimize choosing the blend that is going to be successful with them, what would it be?
I think it's about two-way street of information. So last year, I think we collected over 1 billion data points or interactions with drivers across our system, right? And there's all sorts of different types of drivers. They do all sorts of different types of things. And certain drivers work really well in the recruiting process for certain carriers. I don't always know why. Some of that could be what the recruiters do, strategies they have for outbound dialing, whatever. Excuse me. But what we often find is if we just give you the average of what we see as best, that doesn't always work for you. But if you're not giving us the information back to tell us what drivers went where, which ones are working or whatever, we can't tailor that experience to either maximize for cost per hire or lead to hire or whatever we're aiming for with you. And so there's strategies of how you communicate with them. I think the main thing with that would be ask for more information from us, right? Ask, I would like to know when somebody's in this scenario. We can put referral codes or, workless routing or whatever to put things in the right pathways for you. And then the other thing is give feedback back to us because we'll start figuring out which ones are working for you, which ones are ending up downstream, which ones you're getting a hold of, which ones are interested in you, all that sort of stuff. There's kind of, interesting stuff. So people tend to think that like, hey, a more experienced driver is better. Let's get you somebody with 5 years experience, right? We'd rather that than 2. Well, we find some carriers, they don't recruit well for the people with a lot of experience. Why? I don't know if why matters, right? But we need to, tailor that stuff, right? And so in a match lead program, if you say, I'll take anyone with lots of experience, that's what I want, and then those matches aren't what you hire, your matches aren't useful.
Real quick with that. One thing I would like to point out is how much of that is the relationship. Like, so for instance, CDLLife, we don't just, sell driver information to companies or anything like that. It's definitely not that simple. It's drivers are actually approaching CDLLife for jobs because that's a two-way street. Like, for instance, they trust us for the news and for entertainment. We have our community that we've built, on the app and that kind of thing. So with that, like, it's almost like, do you think there's an element of we built that relationship? That's why the drivers trust us, but it's up to the company on their end once they have that information to continue to build that relationship with the driver.
Yeah, it's all about relationship. Did they just swipe right because they like the picture of a truck, like the Tinder thing, and they don't know anything about you? Or have they studied all the details and it's on a more detailed dating app and they think you're a good fit, right? It's all about the relationship.
That's awesome. Well, hey, Bobby, thanks for coming on the show and sharing all your insights on this hot topic. And thank you for everything you do. Have a great one and keep on sending those leads. And can you make sure I don't wind up in any databases from Paul?
I won't send you along. Thanks, guys.
Hot Seat Services has Rent-A-Recruiter.
Wait!
Hey, Michael, have you heard that Hot Seat Services Rent-A-Recruiter service will place their staff in your organization similar to a temporary hire model?
No way. What else does it do?
Follow me. I have to tell everyone. They take leads in existing databases to put new hires into your business's trucks.
Well, shiver me timbers! What else?
Come on! Their model is more cost efficient because their recruiters are trained and can get your pipeline flowing easier and faster.
No way. Anything else?
No matter how many hires they make, it's a set cost per week, so the more they get, the better their client's cost per hire gets.
Holy sh**.
For more information and to find out for yourself, go to hotseatservices.com.
So before Charles gets more calls, which I'm sure he's still getting them, we need to get out of here so he can go answer these calls that Paul put him in the database. Gentlemen, let's get out of here.
Thank you for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. See you next time.